Power, a word so small, yet it carries depths of meaning. For centuries, kings, generals, and leaders have wrestled with the question, is it better to be loved or to be feared? Enter Niccolò Machiavelli, one of history's most misunderstood figures. To some, a symbol of cold cynicism. To others, a brutal realist who dared to voice what everyone thought, but no one had the courage to say. In his timeless classic, The Prince, Machiavelli doesn't paint an ideal world. He reveals the world as it is, a shaky landscape driven by self-interest, fragile loyalties, and raw human passions. For Machiavelli, relying solely on the goodwill of others is like walking on the edge of a cliff. Love is fleeting, respect is uncertain, but fear is a solid, predictable force. This view might feel unsettling, but by facing it head-on, we may uncover more about ourselves than we're ready to admit. In this video, we'll dive into this timeless dilemma, fear versus respect, and explore how this tension shapes not just leaders and nations, but our personal relationships, our workplaces, and even how we see ourselves in the world. Get ready for a provocative journey through Machiavelli's ideas, and perhaps a confrontation with your own beliefs about power, influence, and freedom. Imagine living in a time when stability was a mirage. In late 15th century Florence, endless wars ravaged cities. Alliances were betrayed as quickly as they were forged, and the fall of a ruler could spell doom for entire families. This was Niccolò Machiavelli's world. It wasn't a place for lofty ideals, but a brutal theater of survival, where winning meant existing, and defeat often led to torture, exile, or death. Machiavelli didn't write for dreamers. He wrote for those with blood on their hands and doubts in their souls. For those who needed to know, how do you hold on to power without being destroyed by it? In this climate, the choice between being loved or feared wasn't just a philosophical debate. It was an urgent, life-or-death decision. By closely observing the political chessboard of his time, the rise and fall of the Medici, the ruthlessness of Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli uncovered a core truth. Human emotions are treacherous. Love, gratitude, and respect. They're fragile. They can be earned through effort, but they vanish at the first sign of trouble. Fear, on the other hand, is an invisible chain. It holds order together when loyalty falters. It cuts through chaos like an anchor in a stormy sea. But Machiavelli didn't advocate for mindless cruelty. He warned that fear must be wielded without hatred. Because hatred is corrosive, it sows seeds of vengeance that will eventually sprout. To be feared without being hated. That was the art every leader had to master. And here's where it gets interesting. Machiavelli wasn't glorifying brutality. He was simply accepting human nature for what it is, full of desires, selfishness, and fears, and asking, how do you navigate this chaotic ocean without being swallowed by it? In his iconic The Prince, Machiavelli poses a question that still echoes in every corner of leadership. Is it better to be loved or feared? His answer isn't cloaked in idealism, it's raw, direct, almost jarring. He argues that while it would be ideal to be both loved and feared, if you must choose, it's far safer to be feared than loved. Why? Because love is fickle. People are ungrateful by nature. The affection that props up a leader today can crumble tomorrow under envy, fear, or simple convenience. But fear is a quiet machine. It doesn't demand constant gratitude or sustained affection. Fear lingers like an unspoken reminder. Don't cross this line. Yet Machiavelli cautions again, fear must not morph into hatred. Hatred creates deep cracks. It sparks a thirst for revenge, even against the most powerful leaders. A hated ruler, sooner or later, faces betrayal, conspiracies, and inevitable collapse. Functional fear, by contrast, is controlled. It's cultivated through respect for authority, the certainty of fair punishment, and the perception of strength. never through blind oppression or random cruelty. There's an art to being feared without being hated, an art that demands emotional discipline, strategic wisdom, and a deep understanding of the human soul. And here's where Machiavelli hits a nerve. Power isn't just about strength. It's about emotional intelligence, knowing when to act with severity and when to show mercy. Being feared with balance is, in the end, a form of respect, not the idealistic respect born of pure admiration, but a pragmatic respect that acknowledges authority as a necessary pillar for order and survival. And this raises an even deeper question. Can we truly earn respect without leaning, at least a little, on fear? When Machiavelli talks about fear and respect, he's not just outlining tactics for rulers. He's mapping the invisible structures that underpin all human power. Fear is the cement that solidifies the foundation of authority. Respect is the facade that makes it legitimate in the eyes of others. Without fear, the structure grows weak, vulnerable to the erosion of human passions. Without respect, it becomes unsustainable, doomed to collapse under the weight of hatred and rebellion. For Machiavelli, true respect stems less from spontaneous admiration and more from the perception of strength and stability. People respect what they fear justly. They respect what feels inevitable. They respect what they recognize as superior, not just in raw power, but in strategic intelligence. And here's a fascinating paradox. The effective leader isn't the one chasing love, nor the one spreading irrational terror. It's the one who creates an atmosphere where obedience feels almost natural, not because everyone loves them, but because everyone sees resistance as futile and even foolish. In Machiavelli's view, power isn't static. It's a living organism. It needs to be nurtured, protected, and constantly adapted to the shifting moods of society. A leader who ignores the balance between fear and respect soon sees their power crumble, either through too much leniency, which invites betrayal, or through excessive cruelty, which breeds silent revolt. So Machiavelli warns, the wise choose to be feared, but act with restraint. They use fear like a precise tool, almost surgical, never like a reckless sledgehammer that destroys everything in its path. True strength, for Machiavelli, is the kind that asserts itself without needing constant reinforcement. It's the kind that fosters an order where loyalty becomes a rational choice, not just an emotional one. And so, in the eyes of the people, fear and respect weave together in a subtle dance. A dance that, when led with skill, holds society together and keeps power firmly in the hands of those who understand it. When we talk about fear as a tool of power, it's easy to picture only kings, presidents, or generals. But the truth is, the dynamics Machiavelli describes are alive in our everyday lives, in ways far more subtle and often invisible. Take the workplace, for example. How often does a boss's authority rest less on genuine admiration and more on the fear of consequences, losing a job, being demoted, or being sidelined? In personal relationships, too, fear can creep in. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of judgment. And though few admit it, we ourselves often instinctively use fear to protect ourselves or shape others' behavior. A withheld word, a calculated silence, a disapproving glance. These are small tools of power, wielded almost unconsciously to create an atmosphere of tension. Here, Machiavelli holds up an uncomfortable mirror. Power isn't an abstract concept reserved for high-stakes politics. Power is relational. It shows up wherever wills clash. And more, he shows us that even those who see themselves as victims of fear-based games are often, secretly, playing them too. Because fear isn't just a negative emotion, it's a social regulator. It curbs dangerous impulses, sets boundaries, protects interests. The problem isn't fear itself, it's the lack of awareness with which we use it and let it manipulate us. When we don't recognize this silent dance of fears and desires, we become vulnerable. We act on impulse, submit to unworthy situations, or worse, perpetuate cycles of oppression without even realizing it. Understanding how fear operates in human relationships is, in practice, a crucial step toward not just power, but autonomy, the ability to choose, not just react. And Machiavelli, though speaking of princes and republics, offers a deeply personal lesson. Those who master their own fears and understand the fears of others master themselves and ultimately shape their world. If Machiavelli shows us that fear is a powerful tool, he also, between the lines, hints at something even more valuable. Respect is a higher and more stable form of power. But how do you build respect without leaning on fear? The first answer seems simple but runs deep. Through consistency. In a world of masks and manipulation, someone who stays true to their principles and acts with integrity becomes rare, and for that very reason, respected. Genuine respect grows not from brute strength but from virtuous predictability. Knowing that, even in tense moments, that person will hold to their values, that they won't be swayed by convenience or opportunism. Another key is the ability to listen. A leader, or even an ordinary person, who imposes their will through intimidation gets mechanical obedience. But one who listens authentically builds connection, and connection in the game of power is stronger than control, because a willing ally is always more valuable than a fearful subject. Then there's the art of compassionate firmness. Being firm doesn't mean being harsh. Being compassionate doesn't mean being permissive. Between these poles lies a subtle space where you can set clear boundaries without humiliating, correct without destroying, protect without imprisoning. Machiavelli understood that ruling by love alone was naive, but he also knew that fear by itself breeds resentment and, in the long run, betrayal. Lasting respect, then, is built in a delicate dance between strength and empathy. You inspire respect when people recognize your ability to act, and also feel that your strength isn't a threat, but a shield. When they don't fear your word will be broken, when they know your judgment is fair, even if stern, when they see your presence as an anchor, not a cage. Crafting this kind of presence is a constant challenge. It demands self-awareness, emotional mastery, and above all, a firm resolve to resist the seductive pull of easy power, the kind fear offers so readily. And it's this commitment that separates leaders who endure from those who fall at the first storm. Throughout history, countless leaders have risen and fallen based on the kind of authority they cultivated, whether rooted in fear or respect. Take the Roman Emperor Caligula, for example. His reign was defined by extreme cruelty and public humiliation. Caligula ruled through terror, but inevitably reaped what he sowed: conspiracies, betrayals, and a brutal death, murdered by those who feared him most. Fear, as Machiavelli well understood, is a double-edged sword. It can protect, but it also festers into latent hatred. Now contrast that with Marcus Aurelius, another Roman emperor, guided by a very different philosophy. Instead of terror, Aurelius fostered stability through personal example. His stoic practice, his genuine care for the common good, his unshakable integrity. He held absolute power too, but his respect was so profound that, even in times of crisis, his authority faced no internal revolts. Not because his subjects feared him, but because they saw in him a source of justice. In modern times, consider leaders like Nelson Mandela. Mandela, even after decades of unjust imprisonment, chose the path of respect over fear. Leading a fractured nation, he could have turned to vengeance or brute force. Instead, he built a new legitimacy grounded in forgiveness, dignity, and listening. His power didn't come from threats, it came from morality, inner strength, and example. And in our personal lives, it's no different. Think of people you know. How often do we follow someone just because we fear the consequences? And how does that wear us down, breed resentment? Now compare that to those you follow willingly. Mentors, teachers, friends. People who inspire, who awaken in you not the fear of punishment, but the desire to rise to match their standard. Psychology backs this up. Fear can drive immediate compliance, but respect fosters lasting commitment. So the great art of power, whether in governance, leadership, or personal life, is recognizing that being feared may be effective, but being respected is eternal. Machiavelli was and remains a controversial figure, but perhaps his greatest genius was showing us that power isn't just about force, it's about human perception. He gave us a brutal mirror and at the same time a flashlight. He showed what fear can achieve, but also how fragile those achievements are. And he invited us, even if indirectly, to consider the harder path: building respect. Because respect isn't imposed, it's cultivated. And true, lasting authority doesn't come from shouting, it comes from example. So the final question isn't just, would you rather be feared or respected? It's, are you willing to be the kind of person who earns respect, even when you could take the shortcut of fear? That's the ethical and deeply human dilemma Machiavelli hands us. And centuries later, it still challenges us. Hey, can I ask you something? After all this, what do you think is more powerful, fear or respect? Drop it in the comments. I really want to hear your take. Your perspective might spark ideas we haven't even considered yet.